subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Thank you very much and good morning. Bon appetit to those who have some food on their tables. I would like, first of all, to thank the organizers of this conference for the invitation. I understand this is a young forum, but it managed already in a few years to acquire importance, popularity, and reputation, and it is indeed very adequate that we get together more often than in the past to discuss where we are in the international relations and which way are we heading. We are convinced that the overriding trend of the global development is the objective process of the formation of multipolar world. New centers of economic might, financial power, and political influence emerge. India is obviously one of them. And it is important to make sure that no serious matter of the global dimension is considered without these new centers of influence. And as President Putin recently mentioned, we believe that the equitable and democratic world order should be based not on the balance of brutal force, but rather should be built as a concert of interests, models of development, cultures, traditions, and actually such structures are being organized in international relations. I would mention BRICS, I would mention RIC, which was the first step towards the creation of BRICS and brought together Russia, India, and China. I would also mention Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which India joined recently and made it even more embracive, if you wish. And I would mention G20. The creation of G20 was the recognition that G7 cannot anymore decide any issue of any significance. And G20, which embraces G7, BRICS, and like-minded countries who support the BRICS position on many occasions. And this is a workable organization, especially in a situation when developing countries have grievances regarding the lack of progress on the reform of the Security Council. Since I mentioned the reform of the Security Council, I would say that the deficiency, the main and probably the only deficiency of the Security Council is under-representation of the developing countries. And we repeatedly reiterated our position that India and Brazil absolutely deserve to be on the Council together with an African candidate, and our position is that the purpose of the reform is to make sure that the developing countries have a better treatment in the central organ of the United Nations. The United Nations Charter is the anchor of any discussions which we are having, and the principles such as sovereign equality of states, non-interference in internal matters, respect for territorial integrity, and so on and so forth, peaceful resolution of disputes, they should be applicable to each and any situation in the world. They should be the guiding point for any discussion to develop any new ideas on the world arena. Unfortunately, those who don't like the emergence of multipolar, more democratic world, they try to hamper this process. And if you noted, our Western friends use the language like international law less and less. Instead, they coined a new concept which they call rules-based world order. And what kind of rules they offer, you can easily understand if you take a look at what is going on in the Organization on Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. When in gross violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention, which requires consensus on any new ideas, they voted through by minority of the member states of this convention, a decision to give the technical secretariat a function to attribute guilt. This is a very blunt example of how they perceive the rules which they promote, the rules designed in a very narrow circle and then presented as, you know, the final solution for any world problem. I think that this way is very dangerous, and by unilateral methods, by trying to impose upon others your own egoistic ideas, we are getting farther from the situation when we must handle the global issues which are of transnational nature. Take terrorism, take drug trafficking, other forms of organized crime, take food security, water security, many other things, including the dangers of bringing weapons to outer space, the danger of weaponizing cyberspace, and many other risks. We can handle them only together. Speaking of this region, we have the common continent, vast, huge continent of Eurasia, and many people were trying, many great people were trying to promote ideas of making this continent really united and competitive in the global world. You remember when Charles de Gaulle had a vision of Europe from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ural Mountains. Then ideas were broadened from Lisbon to Vladivostok. I believe now we can indicate that what we actually have in mind when we speak about Eurasia is the entire space from Lisbon to Jakarta. And when we had a summit in 2016, Russia-ASEAN summit, President Putin shared his vision of grand Eurasian space, which would include Eurasian Economic Union, the ASEAN members, Shanghai Cooperation members, and which should be open to all countries who are part of this common geopolitical space, part of this huge continent, including members of the European Union and any other countries who are not members of any organization, but who have been created on this territory. And we have been promoting Asian-Pacific cooperation in the context of these ideas, together with our friends from ASEAN and all partners, dialogue partners of ASEAN, developing what we called, cooperative structures, cooperative architecture for Asian-Pacific region, centered on the various formats invented by ASEAN, ASEAN Regional Security Forum, ASEAN plus dialogue partners, defense ministers, many other institutions have been respected and have been usefully promoting cooperation between ASEAN and all its partners, and of course, not least, the East Asian summits were very successful. Speaking of rules-based world order, unexpectedly, a new concept was coined, Indo-Pacific strategies, not Asia-Pacific, but Indo-Pacific strategies, initiated and promoted, first of all, by the United States, Australia, Japan, Republic of Korea. When we asked the initiators about the difference between Indo-Pacific strategies and Asian-Pacific region cooperation, they said, well, Indo-Pacific is more open, more democratic. If you look at it closely, I wouldn't go into the details, it is not at all the case. It's an attempt, I think, to reconfigure the existing structures in Asian-Pacific region and to move from ASEAN-centered, consensus-seeking forms of interaction to something which would be divisive. You know what is meant by these Indo-Pacific strategies, and we appreciate the position of ASEAN themselves and the position of India, the position which clearly says that this Indo-Pacific strategy should not be discussed in a way which would imply that somebody should be contained by this cooperation. And of course, when we asked those who promote this new terminology whether Indo-Pacific region includes East Africa, for example, they say no. Does it include Persian Gulf as part of the Indian Ocean? No. So it is rather tricky, you know, and we have to be careful with the terminology, which looks very benign but might mean something else. Then I would like also to, yes, since I mentioned Persian Gulf, we are very much concerned with what is going on there. There are many ideas floating around. The Americans want a coalition, the Europeans want a coalition with slightly different mandate. Recently, we had the military exercises with China and Iran, exercises meant to see how we can ensure the safety of shipping in that crucial area for the world economy. And many years ago, Russia have been trying to promote a cooperation, and in a situation which was much less dangerous than today, we have been suggesting to the Gulf countries to start thinking about collective security mechanisms, something like OSCE for Europe, starting with confidence-building measures, inviting each other to military exercises. We talked to GCC countries. About half of them, 3 countries, were supportive immediately. 3 other countries said that they needed more time. Recently, we revived that idea, and we had a conference in Moscow in September on the collective security system, confidence-building system in the Persian Gulf and around it. Iran has proposed a non-aggression pact for the GCC countries. Our proposal is a bit broader and a bit more far-reaching. It's not just let's not fight with each other, but it's let's be transparent, let's cooperate with each other. And we believe that apart from the Gulf countries, GCC plus Iran, there should be participation of P5, European Union, Arab League, Organization of Islamic States. The idea is still on the table, and we hope it would be looked at. Last thing which I wanted to say is about Eurasia, that Eurasian Economic Project, in a sense of harmonizing various integration groups situated on this space, including South Asia Development Committee, by the way, I believe could be very promising, and the interest which we see for the activities of the Eurasian Economic Union, which Russia created together with its neighbors, is a proof for it. We already signed free trade area agreements with Vietnam, with Singapore, with Serbia. We signed an agreement with Iran, with China. We are negotiating with Israel and Egypt. And the Eurasian Economic Commission has an agreement with ASEAN. And I believe this process would certainly be moving forward. So the 21st century is the time when we must get rid of any methods of dealing in international relations which smack of colonial or neo-colonial times. And sanctions, unilaterally imposed sanctions, ultimata, they're not going to work. And this is not diplomacy, so I don't believe we should discuss sanctions and other non-diplomatic means when we think about the future of the world. I would like to conclude by recalling that 20 years ago, Russia and India signed a declaration on strategic partnership. Some years later, the strategic partnership term was additioned by privileged strategic partnership. And a few years ago, the Indian friends proposed to call our relationship especially privileged strategic partnership. And we want to develop such relations with all countries of the region, and we hope our Indian friends would be promoting the same ideology. Thank you very much, and I would be ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister Lavrov. That was an excellent and very, very comprehensive overview of your worldview. Let me start by something which is absolutely fresh from the oven. You have just, since 2015, Russia has emerged as across the Atlantic. There's a lot of talk about deal making, but most of the deal making seems to have been done by Russia, and that in West Asia. You have intervened decisively in Syria. After that, we've seen your actions over the last few years and last few months, particularly in Libya, where somehow something which was happening under the Berlin process has been taken over by Russia, and you almost got a ceasefire agreement signed, but then something went wrong. How hopeful are you of things turning out the right way in Libya now? After the latest, Haftar has walked out of the agreement, it seems.
Haftar and Aguila Saleh, they said that they needed more time to consult with the people. Saleh was saying that he's the head of parliament and the parliamentarians must be briefed, must be informed. We don't over-dramatize the situation. This thing happened in the past. There were meetings on Libya held in Paris, in Palermo, in Abu Dhabi, when people believed that, when they met in France on Libya, a date of elections was even announced, which is past us, I think, 2 years ago. Then Palermo, then Abu Dhabi. It's a pity that Abu Dhabi deal failed because it was really about the key political matters. Power sharing and sharing the wealth of the country in a way which will make everybody satisfied. Actually, the ceasefire which Presidents Putin and Erdogan called for has been announced by both groups, the Libyan National Army and the fighters who support the Tripoli government. Unfortunately, the document was not signed by everybody. But it was signed by Sarraj and Mishri. And as I said, Haftar and Saleh said that they needed more time to consult. We never pretended that this would be the final meeting to resolve each and every issue. We have been promoting this meeting in Moscow as a contribution to the conference in Berlin, which will be held this coming Sunday, to which I understand, at least we recommended to the Germans to invite the Libyan parties, and I believe they are considering positively. It would be really crucial to make sure that whatever you decide in Berlin is acceptable to the parties. So this is a process, this is a thing in the making, and we will continue to contribute to the success of this endeavor.
Let me turn to the idea of Greater Eurasia, which you spoke about. You spoke at length about the Asia-Pacific, and here I would say, forget labels, forget whether you call it the Indo-Pacific, forget who owns which label. But the fact remains that by whatever name you call it, the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, is key, integral to the idea of united, economically integrated Afro-Eurasia, and which includes the Greater Eurasia. Now, where do you see Russia's role in this? Russia has become a very active player. Even when we talk of an Indo-Pacific strategy, but even if you want to call it something else, Russia is an active player. You just had major exercises which you described.
It's not that we are against philosophical terminology, but terminology must be understandable. We used to say Asian Pacific region. There is an Indian Ocean Commission which embraces all littoral states, as you know. And when people say we want to develop cooperation in Asian Pacific in the form of Indo-Pacific strategies, you immediately ask questions. Do you include African countries? No. Do you include Persian Gulf? No. Then do you include all those who have been known as part of Asian Pacific region? Yes. Why do you need to call it Indo-Pacific? And you know the answer. The answer is to contain China. It's not even hidden, And as I said, the Indian friends are smart enough to understand this trap and not to get into it. We prefer to promote formats which are not divisive, but which unite. And I mentioned the format which was created at the initiative of the late Minister and Prime Minister Primakov, RIC, Russia, India, China. We're going to meet this year, I think, in March or April, in this format for probably 20th time. And this gave birth to BRICS later, which is also a unifying format, which is not against anybody. The same is true for Shanghai Cooperation Organization, where under one roof we now have the former Soviet republics, India, China, Pakistan. Iran is an observer, and we are supportive of Iranian request for full membership, and most of the BRICS countries support this request, and I'm sure this would be satisfied. And these organizations, they also extend the offer of cooperation to others. BRICS, when it meets, we have always an outreach meeting. Now, at the initiative of China, we have BRICS Plus format. In addition to the outreach, outreach is normally neighboring countries of the country where a conference is held, a summit is held. So BRICS Plus is also a new cooperative proposal, and that's why we need to understand what is behind some. Speaking of terminology, what is wrong with international law? Why do our Western friends insist in each and every conference, whenever you have a declaration, a statement, communique, that rules-based world order must be key, not international law? Think about it. The international law is resolutions of the Security Council on Palestine. The rules which the Americans want to apply to Palestine is the Golan Heights, the embassy in Jerusalem, then the legitimacy of the settlements. I'm not challenging the sovereignty of the United States to do whatever they please. But then, if you ignore the rules embodied in international law, in the United Nations Charter, then let's discuss how you treat international law. Or take a situation, I mentioned already, the situation in the Organization on Chemical Weapons. In UNESCO, there are attempts to promote cooperation to implement the anti-doping convention, for example, through non-consensual forms, giving the secretary the right to attribute, as in the case of OPCW. Then, if we speak about weapons of mass destruction, there is a biological and toxin weapons convention, which has been with us for about 20 years already, and from the day of negotiations on this convention, we, together with many others, have been promoting the need to have a verification mechanism, like the technical secretariat in Organization on Chemical Weapons. Most of the participating states were in favor, still are. The Americans almost single-handedly blocked the creation of such a mechanism. Instead, we suddenly heard last year from the United Nations Secretariat that there is a resolution of 1970-something which mentioned that the attention must be paid to potential dangers of biological substances. and the Secretariat of the United Nations says, well, we will create a small unit. We said, wait a little, there is a convention. How can you create a unit on an important thing like this? And there are many other examples. One interesting thing, our good friend Ban Ki-moon, before he left the Secretary General's office, he circulated one annual report in which he coined a new expression, preventing violent extremism. And this was immediately supported by many speakers when this report was circulated. We asked why only violent extremism should be prevented. Why should not we all prevent extremism in any form? And then we understood what happened, because it was not the Secretary General and not the Secretariat who explained to us the meaning. It was a group of our Western friends. And in a nutshell, their vision of this prevention of violent extremism concept is as follows. Extremism is being born in authoritarian societies where the dictators do not give enough democracy to the people. Therefore, the concept goes, international community must reach over the heads of these dictators to the civil society and explain to the civil society how to make their country democratic. As simple as that. Ignoring all international law principles which make the states primarily responsible for fighting extremism, terrorism, and any other criminal matters. So it is not just terminology, it's a very important substantive trend which we witness. And we want to stick to the international law, to United Nations Charter, making the world more democratic on the basis of the principles of the Charter, because it says sovereign equality of states, but we all know that this is not the way things are organized in the practical life.